All right, I've read the introduction and the first chapter and gave a general analysis of Dugin's The Fourth Political Theory. And I'm going to skip over here. And if these ideas interest you, I highly suggest getting the book. There are also some audiobooks on YouTube where you can listen through the chapters as well. But we're going to move to chapter 12, which is kind of a culmination of the fourth political theory. It's entitled The Fourth Political Practice. So ultimately, the fourth political theory is an opening to a possible future. It's a transcending without integrating or mediating the previous categories, 20th century and even previous categories of liberalism, communism, fascism. It's an effacement of these ideologies, these world systems. And he's positing really a Heideggerian answer here, or his reading of Heidegger in terms of an answer, a political, eschatological, soteriological answer to the fourth political theory. And he's going to be describing that in an outline of the fourth political practice. So we'll start reading and analyzing here. So he's going to be introducing the fourth political practice is a practice of non-duality. It's a practice of that transcends the subject-object dichotomy, transcends the myth and the ritual. It transcends science and theory, so theory and practice. He's looking to not find a new theory that will beget a new practice. He's using the Heideggerian term or concept of fundamental ontology to try to find what was there, prior to philosophy, or the question that philosophy was attempting to answer in terms of the pre-Socratics. He says there was, there's this idea that a mistake was made, really instantiated by Plato, of the realm of the ideas or the forms, and that reality is just, the fidelity in reality is consummate, is coinciding with the reality, the actuality, and the theory, right? The praxis and the theory, the thing in itself, and then the thing in its idea, right? So this confirmation or conforming between thing and its ideal is a mistake, according to Dugin's reading of Heidegger here. So he's looking to go back to a previous to the subject-object split that happened in terms of philosophical fundamental ontology of Heidegger. And I have if you're not familiar with these terms, I have a playlist, and he brings in Deleuze. I would highly suggest checking out my Deleuze playlist. I have a Heidegger one as well. It's not as extensive, but my Deleuze playlist talks a lot about Heidegger as well. And those ideas are important if you want to really get a grasp on what Dugin is getting at here. So again, here, let's read a little bit here. The fourth political practice. He says the adherents of the fourth political theory are in need of a plan. The plan is based on the following idea. If we have the fourth political theory as a set of concepts and a theoretical definition, then this theory must be realized, because every theoretical construction can either be brought to life or cannot because of circumstances. He says, therefore, if we theorize and talk about the fourth political theory, we should also think about how it could be realized in practice. However, this should give us pause, because the fourth political theory strains to conclude the political topography of modernity with all its implicit and hidden dualistic models therein. Remember, he's looking to transcend this dualistic model. We can develop a scheme representing the correlation between the theory and its practice in different fields of knowledge. And he's going to give a little table here of science, metaphysics, religion, philosophy, technologies, and common use. And in this table, with these different fields of knowledge on the horizontal axis, and with the two column on its vertical axis, term 1 and term 2, the first column concerns the field theoretically, and the second deals with the field in practice. And here he's talking about how the idea of reality itself is incorrect, because he says in the Greek, they don't have a term for reality or even thing. They have the term pragma, which means kind of action and thing at the same time. He says, the consideration of these columns in itself could bring us to some very interesting conclusions, starting with the question of what theory is in terms of science, contemplation, vision, and what is praxis, the term formed by the Greek pragma, object, objectifying thing, acting. When the problem of defining what is a thing is, res, hereafter reality, arose a few years ago, The attempts to come across a counterpart of this basic term in contemporary philosophy led to the revelation that there is no acceptable equivalent for this Latin word in Greek at all. There is pragma as an action and the act at the same time. It is an active object, but not as an accomplishment. And there is an existent from Aristotle, which is expounded in res in further Latin translations. Therefore, there is no such word as thing in Greek, and this is very important because it means that the concept of reality is also absent. Reality is formed on the basis of res. Reality is a property of res. Reality is whose, what, something referring to the thing or thingness. Therefore, there are the Greek words pragma, existent, and practice for the Latin res. Pragma is the action and object at the same time. So again, he's setting up a way to think about this way of breaking the divide between the theory and practice, where in practice you are embodying the theory in a sense. He says, if we amplify, he says, it is very interesting. The entirety of Greek metaphysics evolves between theory as contemplation and action, praxis, keeping short of severe Latin subjectivity, the thingness hidden in the term res. And he brings in Guénon here with the distinction between myth and ritual. It says, if we amplify the aforementioned duality of this table, we would come across Guénon's model of the principle of the manifested. Notably that the manifestation here is closer to the practice, but not to that which is manifested, as we can see the activity in the second column concerning practice. If we make some further assertions in the history of sociology and religion, we would come across functionalism and the human sociology of Malinowski, which examines this division between myth and ritual. The original Greek definition of myth must be remembered. Myth is a story being told during a ritual. The duality of myth and ritual is one of the basic items extensively discussed in both the history of religion and of social anthropology. In philosophy can be seen the quote-unquote mentality activity or mental activity. This pairing and duality of terms is similar to that of theory and practice. And he only mentions technology this one time in this chapter here in terms of the fourth political practice. He says, and finally, technology is rather simple. It is the duality of a project and its realization. So technology for Dugin is the duality of a project and its realization. He continues here. So we have the two columns. If the fourth political theory is added to the first column, the theory section, term 1, then we can probably find some specific concept in the fourth political practice to place in column 2 in accordance with it. If the fourth political theory was an ideological variation or some combination of the elements of the political theories of modernity, we would follow this strictly. That is to say, if we create an additional concept constructed of the same elements and based on the same topography as the political ideologies of modernity are, we should talk about the field not only theoretically, but also in practice in terms of column 2. So he says if we can outline a fourth political theory, column 1, we would be able to apply it to a fourth political practice. But again, this is what he's avoiding. He says, and generally, it would be interesting to do this because talking about semantic fields associated with fourth political theory in connection with column term 2 could be very useful. But I leave this problem for someone else and propose another way. It is not by mere chance, Dugin says. He says, the point is that if we talk about the very core of the fourth political theory and its fundamental problems, we understand that the main idea of the fourth political theory is to walk away from the dualism between the subject and the object, between intention and realization, and from the dual topography which the philosophy of modernity, the science of modernity, and the politeology of modernity are based. It is not mere chance that we talk about Dasein as the subject of political theory. Dasein, as proposed by Heidegger, is a way to overcome the subject-object duality. That is, an aspiration to find the root of ontology. And ultimately, his solution is the radical subject, and the term radical means root. So he's looking to get at what is the radicality, the root of subjectivity prior to the subject-object divide. All right, moving on here, he says, Heidegger mentioned in between, Inzwischen, or the between, while talking about the existence of Dasein. The principal nature of Dasein is being between. Dasein is between. We should not use the system of classical political dualism, the scientific topography of both modernity and Aristotle's time, while talking about the fourth political theory, and presume the fact that the subject and its core is the basis of the fourth political theory pole, is Dasein. So Dasein is it, essentially. It is necessary instead to examine fourth political practice in another way, taking into account Heidegger's criticism of constructing non-fundamental ontology, i.e. ontology as it is. Heidegger said that if we want to understand Dasein, we should realize and construct a fundamental ontology which would not lose contact with the ontic. The ontic would be the practical, the praxis, that which exists, reality. That is the ontic. So I'll start that again. Heidegger said that if we want to understand Dasein, we should realize and construct a fundamental ontology which would not lose contact with the ontic roots of Dasein, and would not ascend or sublimate sooner or later to anything correlated with the 2,000-year-old from Plato, or even last of the pre-Socratic philosophers up to Nietzsche, general philosophical constructions on which modernity is based. Again, we should put Dasein as the center and the pole of the fourth political theory. What does this mean in context of practice? It means that Dasein should not be qualified either as a theoretical construction or as a principle. Should it be used as a myth, like a narrative? This is interesting. So he asks, should it be used as a myth, like a narrative? He says, this comes much closer, but it should be carefully considered. So he is more attracted to this idea of myth and narrative rather than some kind of theoretical construct that begets a practice. He said it should not exactly be used as a mentality, at least not as an ontological mentality. Likewise, it should not be used as an idea or anything concerning the subject. So again, this is counterintuitive, but he's saying that we don't need a new system, a new theoretical system, and then the healthy or the way to work through the system is to mediate between theory and practice. And this mediation between theory or practice is what he said is the root of metaphysics that Heidegger was critiquing. So keeping this universal and pre-dualistic status of Dasein in Heidegger's philosophy in mind, I want to suggest a reference to some root, to something that predates this dualism, to define fourth political practice. In other words, what is the center of the fourth political practice? The center is something that lies between the columns, between term 1 and term 2, between theory and practice. But this does not at all mean their combination or happy medium. A happy medium is nonsense that we should distance ourselves from. We should not look for a happy medium or a compromise of column 1 and column 2, the polarity of theory and practice, but we should find the root that these pairs grow from, their common root. From the perspective of Dasein analytics, both the subject and object are ontological constructions, grown from the between. We are interested in the instance that both theory and practice appeared from, the instance where theory and practice are not yet divided and are not opposites. We are interested in that kind of instance where both principle and manifestation have a common root. They can never have a common root, not for a moment, and that is the most interesting thing for us. That kind of instance where myth and ritual are not yet separated. At that instance where mentality and activity are in common, where idea means realization and realization is idea, and where thinking and acting have one source. Kind of makes me think of the flow state here, but I don't think that's what he's getting at. Moving on, he says, we are interested in this very intermediate level not achieved by horizontal consideration of these parts, but only by a new non-horizontal dimension. Unlike Hegelianism, Marxism, communication theory, and in principle the entire structure of modernity, we are not interested in anything that sits upon the line between theory and practice. We are looking for something that does not belong to horizontal subspace or to some ratio-based configuration of the columns or to the line between theory and practice. This is the important part. He says, we are interested in something hidden under the theory and practice, somewhere in the common root they both grow from. From this point of view, the question of the prioritization of either conscience or matter during the Soviet period is absolutely wrong. Again, the priority for us is the problem of the common root, and we should grow the fourth political theory and its practice from this root. Having acknowledged this notion as being basic, we can say that the fourth political theory is theory to the same degree as it is practice, and it is practice to the same degree that it is theory. In other words, if we can feel the line between related in depth over these two columns, if we can seize the geometry of this political vector, that is, of course, its real philosophical and metaphysical vector, we will see that these two trees grow from the same root. Again, theory and practice. If we focus on the subject of the fourth political theory, meaning Dasein, or the in-between, we will understand that it does not belong to the horizontal disposition between these two columns. Why do we talk about roots but not the head? Because the question arises, we're talking about the roots, but what about the transcendent? What about ideas of God, of the divine? And he gives a brief treatment of that conjecture here. He says, why do we talk about the roots and not the head? The ontic and not the ontological? The praxis and not the theoretical? This is a very serious and deep moment because we should realize the reduction that is being made. If we realize the horizontal reduction first and we get an unsatisfactory result, we will conclude that we should instead realize the vertical reduction to move towards ontic roots but not ontological heights. Therefore, we should postpone such notions as the dimension of spirit and the divine and move towards chaos and other vertical and depth-oriented concepts. So this last part here is pretty much the central function of the philosophy of Gilles Deleuze, and he's going to bring in Deleuze here in this concept of the rhizome. He actually calls a rhizome, the concept of the rhizome, as a simulacrum of the concept of Dasein. Very interesting. All right, so Nietzsche said, he says, not when truth is dirty, but when it is shallow, the seeker of knowledge steps reluctantly into its water. Important point here. He says, according to this, how can we try to form a clear conception of the fourth political practice? By reversing the order of these two columns as a first step. We should obtain practice as theory, take principle as manifestation, mentality as activity, and thinking as action. What is the fourth political practice? It is contemplation. What is the manifestation of the fourth political practice? It is a principle to be revealed. In what aspect is the myth realized as ritual? It becomes theurgic, Theurgic, fact. It becomes theurgic fact. Let us recognize that Napoleonic theurgy is the reanimation of statues. What is activity as mentality? It is the idea that thoughts are magic, that thoughts can change reality. It is a suggestion that thoughts replace reality as fact. Fourth political practice brings us to the nature of the supernatural world. He's going to bring in, ultimately says the solution is the supernatural world. So it brings us to the supernatural world, to the antithesis of Weber's metaphor in the realization of the technological aspect of the project. What is the supernatural world? It is a world where there is no barrier between idea and realization. It is the principle of adopting a magical view of the world based on the idea that thought is the only thing that crosses worlds, and everything we cross with is nothing more than a thought. He's deeply, deeply mired in postmodernism here, I think on purpose. He says, what kind of thought is it? Pure thought, It's a Deleuzian concept. The vehicle of the fourth political theory and practice lives in a supernatural world. What is menactivity? It is the trans-substance, a transformation of spirit into body and body into spirit, and it is the main problem of Hermeticism. So you see his Gnostic influences and conceptual framework he's working in here. He says, we have come to the realization that fourth political practice is not a rough realization of fourth political theory in some space where the theory is suggested to be different from its practice. There is no more space, no more topos, and no more topology in fourth political practice aside from theory. We have annihilated any other spaces before we started, not in the consummation, but in the very beginning, before we started in a pre-ontological context. Important sentence coming up here. It says, in other words, we should not look forward, it will never be changed, or backward if we really want to change the squalor we live in, because all the remnants that have made this ultimate form of degeneration possible and real have appeared and been stored there. These roots are not mere chance. The scrap heap we exist in is not accidental and has a profound logic. Here, primordial metaphysics is expressed in techniques both modern and postmodern. Accordingly, the only path for real political struggle is appealing to the fourth political practice as to the roots, free from the evolutionary process, from the very conception to the final point where we are now. Because either our political struggle is soteriological and eschatological, or it has no meaning. And he's going to end here with the concept of virtuality, which is a Deleuzian concept, and he's going to try to invert it or subvert it. He says, and here we come to the last point. What does a world avoiding any duality look like? It looks like postmodernity, like virtuality. The wired and virtual contemporary world just says, this is not theory and not practice, not principle and not manifestation, not myth and not ritual, not thought and not action. Virtuality is just a mockery of fourth political theory and practice. It is counterintuitive enough, but this postmodern reality is closer than all previous topologies, including the theological and proto-theological. Virtuality is closer to the very unique model of fourth political theory and practice than any other element. So again, introduces virtuality, critiques it, and then says that it's closer to his theory and practice than any other element. Thus, we can raise the question, how does our traditionalism or new metaphysics relate to postmodernity? I consider them to be very close. Virtuality tries to mix the semantic fields of the columns on the horizontal level so as to become indistinguishable. Deleuze has a concept, he says, becoming imperceptible. And he's saying that in this postmodern Deleuzian structure here is to blur the lines between column 1 and column 2. And in doing so, unleashing what's underneath it, tracing lines of flights and creating new territories, new ways of being, acting, and experiencing the world. Continues here, we can say that Deleuze's rhizome is a postmodern and post-structural mockery of Heidegger's Dasein. They are alike, and they are often described in the same terms. But pay attention to the fact of how postmodernism solves the problem of the reversal of the column's order, theory and practice against subject and object. It solves the problem by appealing to the surface, and this is the main idea we see with Deleuze. Remember his interpretation of Artaud's body without organs. So Anton Artaud is a French artist and dramatist who developed the concept of the theater of cruelty, by which he did not mean sadism, but a method for destroying falsehoods for the audience and unveiling the truth beneath. And the concept of body without organs, which is integral and central to Deleuze's work, comes from Artaud. And it comes from a 1947 play, which was entitled To Have Done With the Judgment of God. To have done with the judgment of God. And he wrote, quote, when you will have made him a body without organs, then you will have delivered him from all his automatic reactions and restored him to his true freedom. Back to the text here. So Remember his interpretation of Artaud's, Deleuze's interpretation of Artaud's body without organs, his interpretation of the necessity of destruction, of the leveling of structure, and his interpretation of man's epidermis, his outer layer, as the basis for the screen onto which his image is projected. It is a point of mockery where fourth political theory and postmodernism meet each other. If the columns mix horizontally, some madness appears. We can use the thesis that Homo integris, the complete integral man, consists of Homo sapiens and Homo demens. Deleuze says free Homo demens. So this is just a quick reflection. This reminded me of the idea of integral theory, Ken Wilber, this idea of we transcend all of the pre-modern, modern, and postmodern views into a higher level, second tier type thinking and being. And he's saying that, I think he's saying here that idea is a mixture is of combining Homo integris and of combining Homo sapiens and Homo demens. Deleuze says free Homo demens. He says that madness should escape from under Homo sapiens and realize the transgression between these two columns in the political sphere. Here comes the rhizomatic process, ionic and chronological ideas of temporality. This postmodern dementia is much like the fourth political theory and differs from it only in its horizontality and flatness. So, this postmodern dementia is much like the fourth political theory and differs from it only in its horizontality and flatness. Important point. The main problem of postmodernity, Dugin says, is its elimination of any vertical orientation in terms of both height and depth. That's his big critique against postmodernism and his Deleuzian structure here. And now he has one more paragraph left to flesh out what he means here. He says, the end times and the eschatological meaning of politics will not realize themselves on their own. We will wait for the end in vain. The end will never come if we wait for it, and it will never come if we do not. This is essential because history, time, and reality have special strategies to avoid Judgment Day. Or rather, they have a special strategy of a revisionary maneuver that will create the impression that everyone has come to a realization and to an understanding. This is the huge arsenal of Heidegger's noch nicht, or eternal not yet. If the fourth political practice is not able to realize the end of times, then it would be invalid. The end of days should come, but they will not come by itself. This is a task. It is not a certainty. It is an active metaphysics. It is a practice, and it can be a potential and rational solution of the enigmatic layers that are discovered while talking about fourth political practice. So that's the end of this chapter. I'd love to know what you guys think of this. I have some thoughts, but I'm not going to share them right now. I just wanted to present the material as best I could and as best I understand it. So let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys next time. God bless.